Welcome back to Investing Talk Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about AbCellera Biologics.
Okay.
Ticker symbol ABCL.
Interesting.
It's a company that's making a lot of noise in the biotech world.
Yeah.
Biotech, it's really hot right now, especially with all the progress in AI.
Right.
And AbCellera kind of sits right at the intersection of those two big trends. But is it a hidden gem or is it a risky bet? That's what we're going to be looking at today.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And what I find really fascinating about AbCellera is they're kind of going through a bit of an identity shift right now.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody remembers them as the pandemic darling. They were the ones who kind of came out of nowhere and developed that COVID antibody treatment.
Right.
But they're really working hard to move beyond that. They're trying to establish themselves as a real, full-fledged biotech company with their own drugs in the pipeline. So
Yeah. Okay. So remind me, how did AbCellera first get on everybody's radar? They kind of came out of nowhere, right?
they did. I mean, they really did. Their claim to fame was bomonethimab. It was one of the first antibody treatments for COVID-19.
Okay.
And that, sent their stock soaring. I think it went up to over $50 a share back in 2020.
Wow.
But then fast forward to today, February 21st, 2025.
Right.
ABCL is trading somewhere between $3 and $4 a share.
Wow, what a roller coaster. So those pandemic profits are dried up.
Yeah, they definitely have. And that drop really kind of reflects a really fundamental shift in their business model.
Yeah.
They're moving away from just licensing their technology platform like they did during the pandemic, and they're really trying to own and develop their own drugs.
Interesting.
It's a much riskier strategy.
Mm-hmm.
But the potential rewards are huge. I mean, think, blockbuster drugs instead of just, licensing fees.
Yeah, that makes sense. But, their latest earnings report for Q3 2024 didn't exactly paint a rosy picture, did it?
Well, no, it's true. The numbers on the surface might make you want to hit the panic button a little bit.
Yeah.
They reported a loss of 17 cents per share, and revenue was only $6.51 million.
Uh-huh.
And that's a really, pretty steep drop compared to the same period last year.
Yeah. So is this a sign that AbCellera is struggling? Should investors be worried?
Not necessarily. I think it's really crucial to understand the context here.
Okay.
Remember all those massive COVID-related royalties they were bringing in?
Right? Yeah.
Well, those have dried up.
Right.
Which explains a lot of the revenue decline. So while the numbers look kind of alarming at first glance, they don't really tell the whole story.
Okay, so it's not that they're failing. They're just in a different phase now, right? Shifting gears.
Exactly.
Investing heavily in building this drug pipeline, which costs money.
Exactly. And speaking of money, they do have a rather impressive war chest to fund this transition.
Uh-huh.
Their latest report showed they had over $670 million in cash and equivalents, plus another $205 million in government funding.
Wow.
So that's almost $900 million.
That's a lot of cash. So they have some breathing room, right?
Absolutely. This cash gives them, a pretty significant runway to develop their pipeline without needing to raise more capital immediately, which, could dilute the value of existing shares.
Right.
But it also raises an important question, how fast are they spending this cash? What's their burn rate?
Yeah.
And, even more importantly, when can investors realistically expect them to become profitable?
Right. Okay, so they have the cash, but the clock is ticking. Let's talk about their pipeline. What are they working on that could justify their current valuation?
Well, they have two lead drug candidates that are generating a lot of excitement. ABCL 635, which is targeting metabolic and endocrine conditions, and then ABCL 575, which is aimed at atopic dermatitis.
Okay.
And both of those are currently in what are called IND-enabling studies.
Huh, what exactly are IND-enabling studies? I'm not sure everyone understands that.
You're right. That's a great point.
Yeah.
Think of IND-enabling studies as like the crucial homework that a company like AbCellera has to do before they can even ask the FDA for permission to start testing a drug in humans.
Okay.
They need to gather all this data on, safety and efficacy in the lab before they can even get to that point.
Got it.
And AbCellera is planning to file those applications, what they call CTAs or clinical trial applications, in Q 2025.
Okay, I see. So these filings, if they happen, would be a huge milestone, right? Why is that so significant?
Because it means that they're getting closer to actually generating revenue from their own drugs, It's the difference between owning the bakery and just selling flour to someone else.
Okay.
If these clinical trials are successful, AbCellera could really be on the path to having, blockbuster drugs of their own.
Right.
And they can finally kind of, leave behind that reliance on partnerships and really become, an independent player in the biotech space.
Got it. So big potential rewards if they could pull it off. Now, we can't talk about biotech these days without mentioning AI. It seems like it's everywhere, and AbCellera is no exception. They're using it in their drug discovery process, right?
Oh, absolutely. And what makes them so interesting is that they're taking this really integrated approach. They're
Mhm.
not just blindly throwing AI at the problem. They're combining this, cutting edge AI technology with deep expertise in the lab, what we call wet lab expertise.
Yeah.
It's a really powerful combination.
I remember thinking about Larry Ellison, the Oracle founder, making some pretty bold predictions about AI in healthcare earlier this year. And that sent a lot of those AI-related stocks soaring, including AbCellera.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of hype around AI and biotech right now, but as investors, it's really important to kind of separate the hype from reality.
Yeah,
AI is a powerful tool, no doubt, but it's not a magic bullet.
right,
AbCellera's integrated approach, I think, is really promising, but, execution is still key.
right.
They need to prove that they can translate all this technology into actual marketable drugs.
So it's not just about having the coolest AI. It's about knowing how to use it effectively.
Exactly.
Speaking of different perspectives, what are the analysts saying about AbCellera's chances? Are they optimistic?
Well, it's kind of a mixed bag, to be honest.
Okay.
Some analysts are pretty bullish, like Stifel Nicholas. They've got a $12 price target on ABCL.
Okay.
They're really betting on AbCellera's technology platform and, the potential for those big wins in their pipeline.
Uh-huh.
But then you have others who are more cautious, like BMO Capital. They've got a $5 price target.
Okay.
They're more concerned about the long road to profitability and, just the inherent risks of drug development.
Interesting. So you've got one analyst saying this stock could triple and another one thinking it might only see a modest gain. That's a pretty big difference of opinion.
Yeah, it is. And, it highlights the uncertainty that surrounds AbCellera's future.
Yeah,
Analyst opinions are just one piece of the puzzle.
right.
They can be valuable data points, but, you really need to understand the rationale behind those ratings.
Uh-huh.
And ultimately, you need to do your own research and make your own informed decision
Right.
based on, your own risk tolerance and your investment goals.
That's great advice. All right, let's get a little technical now and look at AbCellera's stock chart. What are the technical indicators telling us?
Okay, well, if we look at the moving averages, ABCL is currently trading above its 50-day moving average, which is right around $3.08 as of February 21st, 2025.
Okay.
That's generally considered a bullish signal. It suggests that the stock has some short-term momentum and could be attracting buyers.
Okay, so short-term things are looking up. But what about the longer-term trend? Is it aligning with this short-term optimism?
Well, that's where things get a little bit more nuanced. The 200-day moving average is hovering in those $3.70.
Uh-huh.
And since AbCellera is currently trading below that level, that suggests that the longer-term trend is still kind of bearish.
So we have this interesting tension then between short-term optimism and longer-term uncertainty?
Exactly. It's like the stock is kind of at a crossroads trying to decide which path to take.
Right. And to get a clear picture of where it might be headed, we need to look at other technical indicators as well. One important one is the Relative Strength Index, or RSI.
Right.
For those who might not be familiar with RSI, can you give us a quick explanation?
Sure. The RSI is a momentum oscillator that measures the magnitude of recent price changes to evaluate overbought or oversold conditions in the price of a stock. And it's displayed as a number between 0 and 100.
Okay, so it's kind of like a thermometer for the stock, indicating whether it's running hot or cold.
Exactly. A reading above 70 suggests that the stock might be overbought and due for a pullback, while a reading below 30 suggests that it might be oversold and poised for a bounce.
So where does AbCellera stand in terms of its RSI?
Right now, it's hovering around 55 to 60, which is pretty neutral territory.
Okay.
So it's not giving us any strong buy or sell signals at the moment.
So the RSI is sitting on the fence, just like the stock itself kind of stuck between these bullish and bearish signals.
Right. And another indicator we want to look at is Bollinger Bands, which are a measure of volatility.
Okay, so break it down for me. What are Bollinger Bands and what are they telling us about AbCellera?
So Bollinger Bands are lines plotted 2 standard deviations away from a simple moving average, and they kind of help visualize price volatility and potential trading ranges.
Okay.
And when the stock price touches or moves outside the bands, it can signal, a potential continuation or reversal of the trend.
So it's like the stock is bouncing between these bands like a tennis ball in a rally.
Yeah, that's a great way to visualize it. And right now, AbCellera's price is currently near the upper Bollinger Band.
Okay.
And this could suggest that the stock is getting a bit overextended in the short term and might be due for a pullback.
So potentially a bit of a breather after that recent run-up.
Possibly. But on the other hand, if AbCellera can break through that upper band with strong volume, it could signal a further breakout to the upside.
So we're looking for a decisive move one way or another. And you mentioned volume. Why is that so important?
Volume is crucial because it reflects the conviction behind the move.
Right.
A high volume breakout would be much more significant than a low volume one because it indicates that, you know, a large number of traders are confident about the direction of the stock.
So it's not just about the price movement itself, it's about the force behind it.
Exactly. And speaking of catalysts, don't forget that AbCellera's Q4 2024 earnings report is due out on February 27th, 2025. That's just a few days away.
Right, that report will be a major catalyst for the stock. It could send it soaring if they beat expectations and provide positive updates on their pipeline, or it could take a hit if there are any signs of trouble.
Yeah, it all comes down to execution. Can they deliver on their promises? Investors will be watching closely.
So buckle up, listeners. It's going to be an exciting ride.
And you know, we can't forget about that cash burn situation we talked about earlier. Even with their healthy reserves, that runaway can disappear pretty quickly if they don't start generating, some serious revenue soon.
Right, it's like they're burning money to fuel their rocket ship. They have this incredible engine, in their AI-powered drug discovery platform. But they need to reach orbit and become self-sustaining. Otherwise, they'll run out of fuel before they achieve your mission.
Exactly. It's all about execution now. They've laid the groundwork, they've got the tools, but can they actually use those tools to, launch successful products into the market?
Right.
That's the multi-million-dollar question.
Okay, so let's get down to brass tacks here. What does this all mean for, our listener who's thinking about investing in AbCellera? Is it a buy, a sell, or a hold?
Well, that's the question everyone wants answered, right?
Right.
And unfortunately, there's no easy answer. It really comes down to, your individual risk tolerance and your investment timeline.
Uh-huh.
Are you looking for, short-term gains, or are you willing to play the long game?
Right.
It really depends.
Okay, so let's break it down for our listeners here. What are the potential upsides for someone who decides to buy ABCL today? What's the bull case?
Well, I think the biggest potential upside is their pipeline.
Okay.
If ABCL 635 and ABCL 575, if those can successfully make it through clinical trials and ultimately get approved by the FDA,
Right.
it could be a game changer for the company. I mean, we could be talking about billions of dollars in revenue, transforming AbCellera from a promising contender to, a real major player in the biotech world.
And right now, their valuation is still relatively low, right? They're trading near their cash value, which suggests that the market isn't fully pricing in the potential of their pipeline.
Yeah, that's a good point. They're essentially a bet on the future. If their pipeline delivers, their stock price could see, a pretty significant jump.
Uh-huh.
And that's a big, if drug development is a notoriously risky business.
Right. Okay, so big potential upside, but also significant risks. What are the main things that could go wrong for AbCellera? What should investors be worried about?
Well, I think the biggest risk is execution.
Mm-hmm.
Drug development is incredibly complex, it's time-consuming, and it's expensive.
Okay.
Even with a great platform and a strong team, there's no guarantee of success. I mean, think of it like climbing Mount Everest. You can have, the best gear and the most experienced Sherpas in the world, but there are still 1,000 things that can go wrong.
Right. So those CTA filings in QT 2025, those applications to start human clinical trials, those are going to be nail-biters.
Absolutely.
Investors will be watching very closely.
Absolutely. And even if they get the green light to start clinical trials, there's still a long and winding road ahead.
Right.
Clinical trials can take years and cost hundreds of millions of dollars. And there's always the risk of setbacks, delays, or even, outright failures. It's a high-stakes game.
And we can't forget about that cash burn situation. If they don't hit some key milestones soon, they might need to raise more capital, which could dilute existing shareholders and put downward pressure on the stock price.
Right. Dilution is always a concern for biotech investors. So to kind of sum it up, I think investors need to be comfortable with the fact that AbCellera is a high-risk, high-reward play.
Uh-huh.
It's not for the faint of heart.
It's a classic biotech story, isn't it?
It is.
Huge potential cutting-edge technology.
Yeah.
But also a lot of uncertainty and a long road ahead. Now let's zoom out a little bit and talk about the broader market context. How is the overall biotech sector performing right now? Is it a good time to be investing in biotech?
Well, early 2025 has been kind of a mixed bag for biotech. We've seen some volatility, some ups and downs, but there's also a sense of, I think, cautious optimism in the air.
Okay.
Investors are excited about the potential of these new technologies like AI and gene editing to really revolutionize drug discovery.
Right.
But they're also mindful of the risks involved, the long timelines and the regulatory hurdles.
And the Nasdaq, where ABCL trades, has been on a little bit of a roller coaster ride lately, hasn't it?
It has. The Nasdaq, which is heavily weighted towards technology and biotech stocks, has seen some pretty big swings recently.
Yeah.
But overall, it's been trending upwards. And I think there's still a lot of investor interest in these innovative sectors like biotech, which is helping to kind of support the Nasdaq.
So that's a positive backdrop then for AbCellera.
Yeah.
But as we've discussed, their success or failure will ultimately depend on their ability to execute, on their own plans, regardless of what the broader market does.
Absolutely. They can't just ride the coattails of the biotech sector. They need to deliver on their promises, advance their pipeline, and really prove to investors that they can turn their technology into tangible results.
Okay, so let's wrap up this part of our discussion. What's the bottom line for our listeners who are trying to decide whether to invest in AbCellera?
I think the key takeaway here is that AbCellera is a company with a lot of potential, but also a lot of risk. They've got this unique combination of promising assets, a strong cash position, and a world-class drug discovery platform.
Mhm.
But they're still in the early innings of building their own drug pipeline, and there's no guarantee of success.
Like they're a talented young baseball team with a lot of potential. They've got some star players, a great coaching staff, and a state-of-the-art training facility, but they haven't won a championship yet.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah,
They have all the pieces in place,
right,
but they still have to prove that they can put it all together and win the big game.
right.
And the next few months are going to be critical.
The Q4 2024 earnings report and those CTA filings in Q2 2025 will be key indicators of their progress.
Absolutely.
Those events could really make or break their story.
Yeah, for sure.
So, listeners, if you're considering investing in AbCellera, stay tuned.
Yeah.
It's going to be a fascinating ride. Okay, so we've talked a lot about AbCellera's fundamentals, their pipeline, the whole AI angle, and the overall market context. But now let's kind of shift gears a little bit and dive into some of the technical details,
Sure.
Let's look at their stock chart. What are we seeing?
Okay, well, as we mentioned earlier, AbCellera is currently trading above its 50-day moving average, which is right around $3.08 as of today, February 21st, 2025.
Right.
And this is generally considered a bullish signal. It suggests that the stock, has some short-term momentum.
Okay, short-term things are looking up. What about the longer-term trend, though? Is it aligning with this short-term optimism?
Well, that's where things get a little bit more interesting. The 200-day moving average is hovering around $3.70, and since AbCellera is currently trading below that level, it suggests that the longer-term trend is still kind of bearish.
Okay, so we have this tension then between short-term optimism and longer-term uncertainty. It's like the stock is at a crossroads,
Exactly.
trying to figure out which way to go.
Yeah.
And to get a clearer picture of where it might be headed, we need to look at other technical indicators as well. And one that's really important is the Relative Strength Index, or RSI.
All right.
Can you give us a quick explanation of RSI for those who might not be familiar?
Yeah, sure. The RSI is a momentum oscillator that measures the magnitude of recent price changes to evaluate overbought or oversold conditions in the price of a stock. And it's displayed as a number between 0 and 100.
Okay, so it's kind of like a thermometer for the stock,
Exactly.
telling us whether it's running hot or cold.
Exactly. A reading above 70 suggests that the stock might be overbought and due for a pullback, while a reading below 30 suggests it might be oversold and, poised for a bounce.
So where does AbCellera stand in terms of its RSI?
Right now, AbCellera's 14-day RSI is hovering around 55 to 60, which is pretty neutral territory. It's not really giving us any strong buy or sell signals at the moment.
So the RSI is sitting on the fence, just like the stock itself, kind of stuck between those bullish and bearish signals.
Right. And another indicator we want to look at are the Bollinger Bands, which are a measure of volatility.
Okay, break it down for me. What are Bollinger Bands and what are they telling us about AbCellera?
So Bollinger Bands are lines plotted 2 standard deviations away from a simple moving average, and they help visualize, price volatility and potential trading ranges. When the stock price touches or moves outside the bands, it can signal, a potential continuation or reversal of the trend.
So it's like the stock is bouncing between these bands, like a tennis ball in a rally.
Exactly. That's a great way to think about it. And right now, AbCellera's price is currently near the upper Bollinger Band.
Okay.
And this could suggest that the stock is getting a bit overextended in the short term and might be due for a pullback.
Potentially a little bit of a breather after that recent run-up.
Possibly. But, on the other hand, if AbCellera can break through that upper band with strong volume, it could signal a further breakout to the upside.
Okay, so we're looking for a decisive move then, one way or another. And you mentioned volume. Why is that so important?
Volume is crucial because it reflects the conviction behind the move. A high volume breakout would be much more significant than a low volume one because it indicates that a large number of traders are confident about the direction of the stock.
So it's not just about the price movement itself, it's about the force behind it.
Exactly. And speaking of catalysts, don't forget that AbCellera's Q4 2024 earnings report is due out on February 27th, 2025. That's just a few days away.
Right, that report will be a major catalyst for the stock. It could send it soaring if they beat expectations and provide positive updates on their pipeline, or it could take a hit if there are any signs of trouble.
It all comes down to execution. Can they deliver on their promises? Investors will be watching closely.
Yeah, so to wrap up, AbCellera is a really fascinating company. It's at a pivotal moment in its journey, and they have the potential to be a major player in this biotech world, but they still have a lot to prove.
Right.
The next few months are going to be really crucial as they navigate clinical trials, manage their cash burn, and hopefully start to generate revenue from their own drugs. So if you enjoyed this episode of Investing Talk Podcast, be sure to subscribe to the show, leave us a comment, and share it with your friends. Thanks for listening.